Hello, welcome to Star Eater Astrology. My name's Athena, and I'm an astrologer and performer and movement teacher. And I want to start today by just talking about Pluto. Today is July 22nd, 2024. Right now it is 4:19 p.m. Oh, it's almost 4:20. Right now it's 4:19 p.m. in Los Angeles, California, where I am. Just so you know, when I'm recording this, some of the stuff I'm going to say today is kind of perennial information about Pluto, reflections about Pluto. I'm going to talk about a few things today. So if you're listening to it in real time, in this week, at this crazy time period of history, some of it's going to be a little more relevant. But if you're learning astrology and you're learning today, I'm probably going to talk a lot about Pluto and a lot about Mercury. So if you're like new to astrology or you're in your studies and you want to understand those things, then this is absolutely an evergreen podcast. I really want to put out a lot of work on this podcast that has that evergreen quality, that has that like symbolic overturning kind of quality where, you know, we go through these things not just in direct relationship to doing an astrology weather report, but also this idea of there being reflections and information on here that you can bring into your practice no matter when you listen to this. Okay, so let's talk about Pluto, because Pluto is in 0 degrees of Aquarius right now. Pluto is one of the slow-moving planets that really marks eras and marks generations. So we're feeling this big shift. And I just want to talk about Pluto in general, and Pluto and power. And some of the things I have written down that I really wanted to review about Pluto are a few questions. What do we give power to? Who do we give power? Which parts of ourselves do we give power to? Power and power struggles and power grabs and power imbalances and issues with power are a huge part of Pluto. A lot of times if somebody has really prominent Pluto in their chart, like it's aspecting their sun or moon or ruling planet, sometimes really close aspects with Pluto will bring into somebody's life a lot of reflection, issues, and experiences with the power give and take. Like that can be a very central part of what someone thinks about. Pluto also has to me, when I see Pluto, it's the part of the iceberg that's underneath. Like famously, an iceberg only has a little bit above the ocean and then is held up by something underneath that you can like feel is there. I was recently talking with my spouse about some writing that he was doing. He's a screenwriter, and I was reading through his script and giving him notes and giving him feedback, and one of the things that I said was, you know, you're such a good world builder that even when you're not telling me everything about the world, and that I can feel that there's something underneath the iceberg, you know, I can feel the weight beneath the iceberg. And, you know, there are some writers, I think, who write in a way where you know, the story is great and the plot hits and it follows all of its beats and everything, but there are some people who are world builders who, like, because he's adapting something that he was writing as a novel for a while, and you can just feel that there's more, that you can feel that the world is very big even when you don't see it. And I think that when we watch movies and read stories, even if the writers don't give us every bit of information, we can feel when somebody has that big thing underneath and that's where the Pluto and secrecy connection comes up, because Pluto can also have a relationship with secrecy, because we have this thing that's underneath the surface that supports everything. And I think some other themes in Pluto that I wanted to explore were possession and obsession. Pluto, I often will describe it as a magnifying glass or a shrink ray. So if you put Pluto on something, you either have the power, again, power issues, you have the power to make it very, very big, or the power to make it very, very small, in that way that the underneath part of an iceberg, I'm sure there's an actual science technical term for the underneath part of the iceberg, but that underneath part of the iceberg is hidden and it's secret, but it's not that big of a secret, right? It's, if we bring our minds to it, we'll think of it, or we'll go explore it, or we'll go whatever. But if we are just looking at the top and looking at what it's supporting, that's also an idea of making it smaller. So this sort of idea of where we bring our minds and how does that magnify or shrink our perceptions of power. And again, I said that Pluto marks generations, right? And so we're seeing generational turnover in politics right now with Joe Biden stepping down. And like, how do we handle and hand over power? And I think one of the things is, like, we have to ask ourselves, what is power? And I think one of the lessons of Pluto, when Pluto is acting in our lives in a healthy way, it's teaching us that the only power is in passing the ball. The only power is in, if you see it as like a basketball game, I come from a basketball family, but if you see it as a basketball game, right? Like if you see power and this idea of power, and you imagine power as like a ball, maybe it's a glowing ball, maybe it's something beautiful. But it's not supposed to be held entirely by one person. This thing is alive and it's supposed to move. It's supposed to pass through hands. And maybe you have a star on your basketball team that can hit 3-point shots all day, but that's nothing without the rest of the team, right? The ball has to move. And I think that reminds me of Pluto. Pluto doing well is understanding that, yeah, power is what's beneath the iceberg, and nobody needs to hoard that. It's something that needs to be handed over and move. And we have the boomers, who are a generation of Pluto in Leo, and Leo is a fixed sign. Leo is a sign that does not like at its unhealthiest doesn't want to give up power, and when Pluto is in Leo, it's the fixed fire sign. It wants the attention, it wants the glory and everything like that. And so we did see Joe Biden kind of like really wanting to hang on to the candidacy. And I think in general, we've seen a lot of politicians in the boomer generation, in the Pluto and Leo generation, having a really tough time giving over the power. And Pluto in Leo is kind of like, you know, wants to hold the power a little more, wants to sit on the throne a little bit more, but they're in danger of becoming just a figurehead that doesn't really have an ability to handle the power. And like I said, power needs to be passed on, and the idea that Biden passed on to Harris, and Harris is the next Pluto generation down, because Pluto moves so slowly, it's every 20 years, and Harris has Pluto in Virgo, which is the next sign over, a mutable sign, and mutable signs often are very good at filling in the cracks, and also in some ways taking in the secondary position, vice president sort of thing, like, and stepping up and being able to be flexible with a lot of information handed to them. So the Pluto in the Pluto in Virgo generation is a bit more dexterous than the Pluto in Leo generation, because like boomers like, I don't want to but boomers, Pluto in Leo generation, really stubborn in a way that is kind of about them, and maybe they can't see beyond the way things worked for them. And then the Pluto in, once you get along to the other generations, and Kamala Harris was born in 1964, so that's smack dab in the middle of the Pluto and Virgo generation. You have people who are in this in-between space, learning how to be a lot more dexterous with power. And then after that is the Pluto and Libra generation, and there's a judiciousness to them, and then, of course, millennials are the Pluto in Scorpio generation. That's my one. But what I find is really fascinating about Pluto transits and the way they mark generations is that because Pluto transits are so long, 20 years, the generation before the generation you're in doesn't have experiential context for your generation. So that's why like generations of teens who come up seem so foreign to their parents, seem so foreign to their grandparents sometimes, because Pluto takes a really long time to go through there. And so each generation's power and power moves and style of power and style of collaborating with or hoarding power is really, really dependent on a transit that is so long that, someone's parents aren't going to remember So if you're born in Pluto in Scorpio like me, my parents never knew somebody from Pluto in Scorpio because it moves so slow. So different generations, if you want to find a parallel to your generation, you kind of have to look way, way back, and history, I like the phrase that history doesn't repeat itself, but history rhymes, and astrology is such a tool to help us look at those rhymes and like what rhyme schemes are really far apart in the poetry and what rhyme schemes are really close together. And Pluto is we haven't seen this generational rhyme scheme in a while. And I think that part of why generations can struggle to understand one another is just that there's this kind of you don't have context for the way that person perceives power. You don't have context for the circumstance because you didn't know anyone like that. You didn't know anyone like this generation. But it's not, every new generation isn't a whole new idea. I mean, they're interfacing with a new set of contexts and everything's just remixing itself all of the time. It's just that generations take a while to mirror themselves in a lot of ways. And I think Gen Xers who often are between Pluto in Virgo and Pluto in Libra, although I don't know how they market with all these names. It feels like structurally when we refer to like Zoomers and Gen Xers and Millennials and Boomers that it feels sort of constructed to keep us at odds with each other a little bit to me. But like astrologically, it's interesting that there's a fixed sign, Pluto in Leo, the Boomers, who grip onto power kind of tightly and in this like way that you're an old lion now, step aside. And then you have these two signs in between the Pluto in Leo generation and the Pluto in Scorpio generation, and the power being handed over to the next generation, to the Pluto and Virgo generation. Give it to the mutable sign so they can make some adjustments on it, and then give it to the cardinal sign so they can put those adjustments into play before we get to another fixed sign that comes to power. And then the millennials are also a fixed sign. So I feel like when you see kind of people, I feel like the sort of generational war that happens is often millennials criticizing boomers criticizing millennials. And I think hilariously that Gen Xers have always been like, we were forgotten. We're sort of in the in-between. And that's really fascinating to me because they've got Virgo and Libra Plutos, and those signs are like, Virgo does work behind the scenes, and Libra is sort of Pluto and Libra can be more wishy-washy because not wishy-washy, but like when I describe Pluto as being what's underneath the power structure, what's underneath the iceberg, Libra doesn't always want to look at that. Like Libra doesn't always want to look at what's underneath there. They want to beautify the top of it, or like have everything sort of fair and neutral, which can be very interesting. But the millennials are Pluto and Scorpio, and Pluto in Scorpio wants to dig up the dregs and like map the underworld. Pluto and Scorpio kind of wants to map the underworld and point to a lot of the problems. And I think there's a certain kind of like optimism and starry-eyedness and ability to put ego first that comes with the Pluto and Leo generation, the boomers, that they are sometimes disgusted by the idea of the millennial generation, the Pluto in Scorpio people, because we are actually very interested in like looking at what's wrong and pointing to it. And this kind of idea of more like think positively isn't as much a superpower of this Pluto and Scorpio generation, almost in the way that like, no, think what's actually realistic is to overturn things. And I think what's really interesting about the Pluto and Scorpio generation is that that's where we do have our fair share of conspiracy theorists, and it has this relation. I think Scorpio in general has this relationship with conspiracy, with digging deep, with digging underneath things, and like sort of this that there are a lot of people in the millennial generation who are conspiracy theorists, and I think that their uncoverings have gone up the chain of like to the older generations in a way that has seeped through in a water sign like way. And so that's really interesting. But I think that this desire to face things kind of head on and dive in those waters and say, here's how it's built, here's how the power structure works. I've gone underneath. I know how deep the iceberg goes. I know all the shapes of it. I'm mapping it out. That's the Pluto and Scorpio generation's job, with kind of calling within their generation. It's we're supposed to go underneath there and map it all around and look at it and be very realistic about it, and and get in there. So the Pluto and Scorpio generations really want to get in there and really want to understand also the emotional effects of things in the world. So the Pluto and Scorpio generation is a generation who really likes therapy, who really, really likes stuff like shadow work, who that has come out of the woodwork. Stuff like shadow work has come out of different practices. I think Pluto and Scorpio generation is really, really fascinated by psychology and understanding their own psychology and doing boundaries within their psychology and exploring things emotionally and how that relates to the world and what they're supposed to do to care for the world in that way. And so I find that very interesting, because I do think Pluto and Scorpio people have that advantage. And the modern ruler of Scorpio is Pluto. I do traditional astrology, so I do traditional rulerships, but a lot of people use a different set of rulerships where instead of Scorpio being ruled by Mars, it is ruled by Pluto. So, it is said that Pluto's really well in Scorpio, because Scorpio dives deep and Pluto's about that underneath of that power structure, essentially. And so we have this question of do we want to look at the top of the iceberg and pretend that that's all there is, or are we willing to dive deep and be brave and really map the entire thing and base our power structures or our understanding of the world on the entire thing? And I think I think Pluto and Scorpio generation will be really interesting when the Gen Xers are able to pass the baton to us, to the Pluto and Scorpios, because I think we've spent a lot of time living a little bit more in the underworld in a realistic way. I have a Gen X family member who has given me terrible career advice and terrible entrepreneur style advice that is just not appropriate for how I work and what the world is like right now, and is extremely unrealistic. And I have also gotten the worst advice from boomers for how to structure my life, career, and I get pretty bad advice. I've gotten pretty bad advice from both of those generations, and I think it's really important to always not mirror the advice we're given from generations above us, but again, definitely listen to their stories and take it all in, but make sure that just because you're younger, you're not giving away your autonomy and perspective, because really only you have a really good temperature on what your actual life is like, on what your own coming to adulthood is like. Nobody can know that. Nobody can know what it's like to be your age in this particular time period at this particular time. So these sort of parental style advice that we might get from generations above us, it really needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because replicating what they did is not appropriate for this time period. There needs to be a kind of flexibility, and I think that sometimes older generations will say that the subcultures and emerging political values of younger generations are unrealistic or idealistic, and it's well, no, because this next set of people knows who they are, knows what they want, and still has the opportunity to build differently. And so I think that sometimes older generations, because their world is structured the way they're used to it being structured, it's hard for them to actually imagine being a young person now. It's actually really hard for them to imagine what it's like, and it's really important to be humble as younger people are coming up and not to exert a kind of power over them, because they have information about how the world works that you can't possibly have. People who are younger than you, they have wisdom, they have a temperature on extremely important information, and I think that the generations having difficulty working with each other right now is an extremely interesting thing, because our oldest generation in power is Pluto and Leo. It's a fixed sign. It's Leo, so it's regal and it wants to wear a crown. And so Pluto being there, it's like you can't sit on the top of the iceberg with a crown on forever. There's stuff going on in this ocean, kind of thing. And so I find that all to be really, really helpful information, because I feel sometimes like as a millennial, as a Pluto and Scorpio generation person, that I'm not doing quote unquote as well as the generations before me because of the shifts in the economy and the circumstances in which we found ourselves coming to adulthood. And I think that like the media and the way we talk about generations has infantilized millennials massively. Like the podcaster Blind Boy Boat Club, and the Blind Boy podcast is awesome. You should listen to it. It's not astrology, but he's a storyteller and writer, and he's got lore, man. He's amazing. But he used the word kittenizing, I think he said, about like, because he's like 40, I'm 38. And just sort of this feeling that there was no us coming to adulthood because of how we were kind of dragged by the generations above us, and how this idea of financial stability, this idea of being able to lace into the system effortlessly was kind of the marker of adulthood in a lot of ways. And when that didn't become available for so many of us in a very clear way, that the path that was clear for the people before us was not the same path that we were walking, it can be infantilizing. This idea that just because somebody has less money or hasn't figured it out yet, that they are smaller or they are lesser or they are, I think there's this feeling when you don't have a lot of money, and I know, or this feeling that you haven't like hit the markers of adulthood, those have completely changed. It has completely changed of what that means, and there was no context for this new group of people, this Pluto and Scorpio generation people, who, again, we've come back around to Pluto being in a fixed sign, and the boomers think that their way of doing things is fixed, and that's how it works because they were a fixed sign, and now the Pluto and Scorpio folks, the millennials, they're also a fixed sign, and it's really important as the fixed sign to set your bar, but I think that part of the boomer vibe, if I'm just talking about it in terms of Pluto in Leo, and obviously not all boomers, obviously not all millennials, because people's charts interact with Pluto really differently. Just for the record, I have Sun trine Pluto to pretty much really close degrees, so I feel like a lot of the outer planets have a big relationship in my chart, so I really think about broader things, about generational things, about generational relationships. And then you could have Pluto not aspecting any of your personal planets in your chart, so this might not, the markers of your generation might not be screaming within you, or you might not be feeling as much as what everybody else is feeling. That can happen. Or like you might actually be able to follow in your father's footsteps, who's a boomer, and yeah, that's good for you. It must be nice for some. But yeah, so there's this idea of like really needing to set standards with fixed signs, like really dig the feet in. And I think that it'll just be really interesting to see the Pluto and Scorpio generation come to power. But right now we have these kings who sit on the top of icebergs pretending that the bottom of icebergs is not there, and they wear a crown and they're like, look, I got to the top of the iceberg, and maybe that was once really impressive and really cute, but it's time to go. I've been recently watching a YouTuber who is a psychologist, and I will put her information in the notes, the show notes here, but she's talking a lot about archetypes, a lot about not just like the hero's journey or the maiden's journey, and she's degendering them in this really cool way, but she was talking about this one of the archetypes. There's two archetypes that take place in middle age. So there's 6 archetypes, 2 of them are about your younger years and coming into your early adulthood, like leaving home as the naive and then growing into the hero's journey. And there's this fascinating feeling that everybody's obsessed with the hero's journey, that's what so many stories are based on, that is an archetype, that is it. But then the archetypes continue. So the middle-aged archetypes are the luminary, who in some systems is called the queen, and that's like going from, okay, you've done the hero's journey and now you have to step up to the throne. And then there's the king one, the sovereign. And the sovereign needs to learn how to give up power. Like to step up to the throne and take responsibility on behalf of people is early middle age in this system. And then being able to understand when it's your time to walk away from the power and know that you've built as much as you could, and be able to step away from that throne and let yourself go into the final 2 archetypes of old age, which are, I think she calls them the crone and the mage, and that's fucking awesome. I'll link to her videos because it's really insightful, and it gives such a wealth of understanding of the phases of adulthood and how much the millennials we are middle-aged now. I am 38. I am in the second 2 archetypes. I am in the king and queen ones. And the idea that we are all really into being the hero, the hero's journey, which is the one from young manhood. And this idea, like, it's the one from when you're young and you have a different kind of fire and you have a different lesson to learn. But the idea that we see our public figures like retain a little bit of that I'm the hero kind of thing, it is really, really immature. And I think there is something really immature sometimes about the Pluto in Leo generation, because it's Leo, it likes to roar and be like, check me out. And I think with Pluto, they're using Leo for power reasons, like when Pluto is in Leo and it has to do with these things I'm talking about, like power struggles and power-based things. Using Leo for power is sort of like, look at me, I did the power. And it does have that quality of being fiery and younger, as often fire signs do. And so I find that really interesting because there's this standard that they think power looks like. And the new generations of power don't look like that. And they seemingly have an inability to be able to be even in the middle-aged part of the archetypal journeys. So I find that really fascinating, how much someone might identify with being some kind of like winner or conquering hero and be unable to like really step into the psychological maturity of middle age. And I think what's very fascinating is that I think Pluto and Scorpio generation folks, the millennial folks, have been, kittenized, as Blind Boy says, but have been infantilized and kittenized in the public conversation and everything. And that's mostly just because they didn't have money and might have needed to live back home. And it's also because of stuff like the misunderstanding of that video games are actually an artistic medium, and that actually the world does run on the computer now, and being on a computer isn't like doing nothing. I was on the train once and I was answering some emails for work on my phone, and this was like early when I had a smartphone, so not everybody had them. And I remember this guy, like, it was hilarious. I was on the Long Island Railroad and I was like wearing my sweats, and I was a model at the time, so I think I was coming home from like a shoot or like fashion week, and I was on the Long Island Railroad on my way home, and I was exhausted. I must have looked a mess. My makeup from the show was, and I was on my phone, and I still had stuff to answer. Like, I had to send a bunch of stuff to my agent at the time. And I was like, I gotta get this done. And I was hustling, but I looked a mess, right? Like I looked like a teenager who doesn't know what they're doing, but I was 25. And this guy was just said very loudly, he's in a fucking business suit, to another commuter. I hated going at like actual commute hour with like, not because it was crowded, but also because, because it was crowded, but also because people suck. But, so this guy was just like, tell the person next to him, these kids are always on their phones. And I'm like, fuck off. Like, you're gonna read that newspaper, bro. And like, now you see boomers kind of like addicted to Facebook and stuff like that. But this inability to see how people use power is a very interesting way to think about Pluto, because I'm a Pluto and Scorpio generation person and I have Sun trine Pluto. And so like, I really know I understand my personal power. I understand that it's not something I necessarily roar about or wear on the surface. I understand the what's beneath the iceberg. I'm willing to not have to show off about it. If there's one thing about Scorpios, they often don't need to show off to know that they are very smart or know that they are very powerful. So Pluto and Scorpio is like, look, man, I'm still doing Pluto things. It's still power. You don't know yet. That's okay. It might be hidden for you. Scorpio is a lot about hiding and hidden things, and so is Pluto. So I think millennials, Pluto and Scorpio generation are really using the hiddenness and the unseen really, really well, and can be very easily infantilized by the generations above them. I think Pluto in Leo people, the boomers, are like those kings that sit on the top. And I think that Pluto in Virgo people are doing Pluto in a Virgo way of like making sure the power is running really well and taking care of the bits and bobs, but may not be taking the power for themselves, because Virgo does take some delight of being the power behind the throne. And I think Pluto in Virgo is able to sort of get a good feel for some of the stuff beneath the surface, but they're so close to the Pluto in Leo generation that they are kind of under their thumb. And then I think the Pluto and Libra people, who are also Gen X, their style of power is much more wanting to balance those scales, or wanting to judge things, or like desperately wanting things to be lighter than they are, and seeking sort of a lightness, that Libra lightness. But like Pluto in Libra, I don't think Pluto's that well in Libra, because there's like, and I just think Pluto and Scorpio people are just like, there's the darkness, somebody has to go in, I'll do it. I don't care if I do it in sweatpants. That's not really the point, bro. Like that doesn't define my maturity. That doesn't define my adulthood. Or you think I'm going to put on a suit and that's going to be maturity? You're laughable, Pluto in Leo, because it's not really about what's on the surface, my bros. We're going under. I've got a scuba suit. We're going in there. We're going to get to the bottom of it. This sort of idea of getting to the bottom of it is very, very Scorpio, like relentless, in the same way that Pluto in Leo and Leo is relentless about shining outwards. So I find this generational thing and the passing of power to be really, really fascinating. I think I'm going to end there. I want to talk about some Mercury stuff because we have an upcoming Mercury retrograde, and Mercury's just about to go into Virgo. And it's only going to be at its home side of Virgo for a little while to get your shit together before it starts to retrograde. So like this week, by the way, and right now it's Monday, July 22nd. Basically Mercury is going to go into Virgo tomorrow. And so if you can this week get your shit together, not tomorrow, on the 26th. So let me just quick do this. Mercury is going to go into Virgo on July 26th. That's later this week. Okay, awesome. Cool. It's going to be going forward in Virgo, where Mercury's really well in Virgo in the way that you can actually take care of practical details and all the, like, dot your I's, cross your T's, like loop your Q's, like send the letters you need, all of that shit. Just take care of it ASAP, because it's gonna retrograde and you're gonna have to and it's going to be a little more annoying to do those things. I want to talk about Mercury in a whole separate podcast, because today I spent 3 hours on the phone with my health insurance and 3 hours at the DMV. So that's where I'm at right now. And I wanted to kind of talk about bureaucracy, Virgo, Mercury, and dotting the T's and crossing the I's, as it were, if that's how you do it. Yeah, I wanted to talk about that a lot more, but I got really into talking about Pluto and generations this time because I just think it's something absolutely worth thinking about. I'm going to link that woman's videos below. If you would like to get a reading with me and maybe understand how Pluto is aspecting stuff in your chart or anything else, you can go to athenaready.com/astrology and use the code ASTRO40 to get 40% off a face-to-face reading. We'll go on Zoom. I'll take you through everything you want to know, whether you're experienced with astrology or you're brand new and are having the chance to look at your chart for the very first time with a professional astrologer. Either way, if you book a face-to-face with me, if you book by the end of July and you use the code ASTRO40, you will get 40% off. So that's really great. I'm booked for the rest of the month, but I'm booking right now for August. So you'll still get the 40% if you book in July for August. So we'll find a day. We'll do the thing. I love all of my new clients lately. Thank you, everyone who's a returning client, for telling your friends, because I am so overjoyed that my astrology practice over the past 10 years hasn't really had to use the internet in a way that I find annoying, and that people recommend friends, and that I see friends of friends of friends of friends, and that people come back. That means the world to me. It makes me feel like I'm a little bit more old-fashioned in a way that's very romantic. And it also means that I don't have to play the algorithm game and depend on that, because I love word of mouth. I love more insular communities. I love things that are more hidden and have power to them, and don't need to show off in order to have that connection, in order to have that power. And that is why I am of the Pluto in Scorpio generation, and it does aspect my sun very, very directly in a positive way, in a trine. Hey, check it out. All right, so Pluto, power grabs, power struggles, relationships with power. What are we giving power to? What are we taking power away from? How do we give power to something? How do we take power away from something? Okay, that's something to think about. Thanks, guys. Bye. Thank you.